Sean Diddy Combs. More specifically, the raids that have been conducted at homes linked to the rapper, producer, entertainment mogul. If you're new to this story, Homeland Security, they conducted these searches on these properties in Los Angeles and Miami. Reporting indicates that this is in connection to an ongoing investigation through the Southern District of New York. Now, the raids came amid several different civil lawsuits filed in recent months accusing the rapper and others of sex trafficking, sexual assault, rape, domestic violence. It goes on and on. It's absolutely horrific. But around the time of these raids, Diddy was reportedly last seen pacing back and forth outside of a Miami airport. There was a video that circulated this. He was accompanied by some family members. Now, at the time, the 54-year-old rapper was not detained. He cooperated with authorities. He was not arrested. Let's make that clear. However, I should tell you, in the latest development, Diddy's associate, alleged drug mule, Brendan Paul, was arrested and charged, but with possession of cocaine and marijuana. Now, Combs' attorney, Aaron Dyer, responded to the raids yesterday, saying, quote, "Yesterday, there was a gross overuse of military-level force as search warrants were executed at Mr. Combs' residences. There is no excuse for the excessive show of force and hostility exhibited by authorities or the way his children and employees were treated." Dyer went on to say that the raids were, quote, "a premature rush to judgment of Mr. Combs that is nothing more than a witch hunt based on meritless accusations made in civil lawsuits. There has been no finding of criminal activity or civil liability with any of those allegations. Mr. Combs is innocent and will continue to fight every single day to clear his name." Now, remember, Combs has not been criminally charged in connection with any of these allegations. One of those lawsuits was already settled. The other ones are still ongoing. So that is correct. There has been he's not been found guilty of anything. He's not been charged. There is no civil liability yet. But as the story develops, we are going to bring you the very latest, and there's a lot to get into. In the meantime, we are going to dive into this live chat, live Q&A for the rest of the hour. Again, Facebook, X, YouTube, submit your questions. We'll bring them on the air. Now, to help me answer this, you don't want to just hear from me. I am joined by Law&Crime legal analyst Brian Buckmeyer, who's right here in studio with me, and retired FBI agent Colin Schmidt out of Los Angeles. We're going to get right to it. Gentlemen, good to see you. First of all, Colin, were you anywhere near the raids in LA? I think I should ask you that first. And has your traffic been interrupted in any way?
No, I'm in Southwest Riverside County, so I wasn't down there, and that neighborhood's a little bit above my income level. Okay,
well, let me ask you this. So we have a question now. This is from Chocolo, and I'm going to say this. I'm going to mess up these names a lot. The first step is admitting it. I'm going to mess up these names a lot. Chocolo 8 Milk from YouTube. FBI, I thought this was Homeland Security that raided Diddy's mansions because their specialty is investigating human trafficking. I throw it to you, Colin, just a general idea about the fact that you had the Homeland Security being the ones who actually conducted the raid.
Well, they have the same authorities as the FBI does, and based upon their connection to the border and a lot of the things that are going on there, they've gotten a lot more involved in the human trafficking side of the crimes that are going on in the country. And frankly, they do a fantastic job. And obviously, they had a lot of resources there for a reason, and I would be interested whenever we have that opportunity to see the affidavit that supports that warrant.
All right, so I'm glad we cleared that part up because who conducted it tells us a lot about this. There's also a preliminary question I want to now go to Brian about. This is from Nikki's Girl from YouTube. Question is, they say it's a trafficking case, so who is he trafficking to? I get that he is involved, however, who else is involved? It's a really good question when we talk about what exactly is sex trafficking. What are the elements? Who would he be involved with?
Yeah, so human trafficking and then the more specific sex trafficking is simply transporting someone that affects interstate commerce. Usually that's just traveling across state lines and participating in sexual misconduct in one way, shape, or form. So if you look at the Cassie lawsuit or you look at the Rodney Jones Jr. lawsuit, where there are civil allegations that people were brought across state lines for the purpose of coercing them to have sex, that would be trafficking. It would be the individual that you're moving from one place to another, or the person that you're having them engage in sexual conduct in that state or that area would be the trafficking. It's a little different than what we typically think of just someone putting another person in a vehicle and moving them to another state. It's the sexual activities that occur in the different states as you move them from one place to another.
That's a good point. I'm glad you broke that down. I want to go to Colin for this. So this is a really good question from an equally amazing name. It's cats.addict from YouTube. I'm glad you admitted your addiction. Again, first step is admitting it. The question is, Prince Harry named in Diddy's lawsuit, true or not? Now, I can tell you, as far as I know, Colin, in the lawsuit, they're referring to the Little Rod Jones lawsuit. This is Diddy's former producer, accused him of sexual assault, sexual harassment. Encourage everybody to check out the lawsuit. This is actually the amended lawsuit right here. I know it seems like a lot, but it's actually a disturbing read, to say the least. My understanding is Harry is one of the people, a celebrity name associated with Diddy, which, by the way, I don't think there's any more mention in that, but I think the bigger issue is when you're dealing with high-profile cases like this, and we said the same thing with the Ghislaine Maxwell and the release of all those documents, you're going to hear names. Doesn't mean they're implicated in any way or they're criminally responsible in any way. It's just a connection, a celebrity connection to Diddy. What's your take on it? Because federal authorities have to be very careful and sensitive to who is discussed in these kinds of investigations.
Well, I think a lot of times they'll put names in there. I mean, that it's truthful. I mean, they have to swear to the affidavit, but make it even more salacious to get more attention. It's unlikely Prince Harry had anything to do with this. He was it's from what I understand from the news reports, he just attended a party and he was just listed in the lawsuit as just one of the attendees, but there was absolutely no inclination or no accusation against him or anybody that's in his circle.
I will tell you, if it comes out that Diddy or anybody in his inner circle are ultimately charged with the worst of crimes that we're talking about here, sex trafficking charges, then it goes into a conversation like we had with the Weinstein case or even the Epstein case. Was this just known and never discussed? Was this just known and nobody came forward? Those are going to be some tough questions. But we're not at that point yet. But Brian, I go to you now because this is actually two questions that I think are equally important. One is from Davo from YouTube. Well, first let me do this one. This is the Expat Exchange from YouTube. Based on the information known, what charges is Diddy likely to be hit with? RICO? And then also throw this one from me. This is Davo from YouTube. What's the sentence if charged and found guilty?
So let me put it this way. We don't know anything about the investigation in this case. We know that it's sex trafficking, and we are connecting the dots as best as we can and looking at the civil complaints from the 5 different people, one being Cassandra Ventura, her name also is Cassie, that one's settled. So we look at the other 4. So if I was a betting person looking at those civil complaints, I'm saying that I'm looking at Rodney Jones's, and we're talking RICO because he alleges RICO charges in his civil complaint, as well as the human and sex trafficking federal charge. That one, if I'm correct, I'm going to double check it. I think it's 18 USC 1591. That has an ultimate sentence of up to 25 years in prison. Now, the other thing you have to think about is if you're believing the allegations of Rodney Jones to be true, and there are multiple allegations of trafficking, there's a potential for multiple charges of trafficking. So it could be one charge of human trafficking, which is 25 years, or it could be multiple that are sentenced consecutively. So right now it's speculation, but you'll look to the civil complaints and that's what you can.
And I'm glad, let's also make it clear, these are civil complaints. These are accusations that make up a civil lawsuit. Having said that, you could have behavior that is overlaps, right? Have behavior that's civil, but also part of the criminal arena, but these are civil allegations.
Well, the complaint is civil.
Correct.
But what they are accusing in the conduct, and even in the civil complaint, they are criminal statutes.
Correct, yes.
And so you can take, as we've seen, and I'm not drawing the comparison to say that Sean Combs is like these people. I'm just saying that the process is similar.
Right.
You can draw comparisons between Harvey Weinstein, who had civil cases that turned criminal, R. Kelly, Jeffrey Epstein. You can have civil claims that have criminal bases that someone can investigate and move forward on.
So, Colin, let me move it over to you. We have Danny Q from YouTube. What determines if this case is federal or state RICO? I mean, we know it seems to be a federal investigation. Homeland Security, as we talked about, was a part of it. So how do we know, or what makes it something federal versus state?
Well, obviously the HSI went ahead and did the raids, and the concept of RICO gets thrown around a lot. It doesn't get charged very often because there's a very high bar to prove RICO. And basically a RICO is an enterprise of 2 or more people that are engaged in specified unlawful acts or criminal activity that's been identified in the statute as, and obviously human trafficking is identified there. So what he's going to be charged with, if at all, because he is innocent until proven guilty, we don't know. I mean, that was the purpose of that search warrant, is HSI going in there and gathering all the evidence. And I'm sure they're out doing lots and lots of interviews. And then if there is indeed victims attached to this, as in people that were human trafficked, they're going to be talking to all of them and wrapping this up. And then I think this will come to a head quite quickly because of all of the media attention that's swirling around.
Let me ask you my own question about that, Colin. A lot of people have been wondering, why were charges not in conjunction with the raid? Why did an indictment arrest happen in conjunction with the raid? If you can explain that.
Well, it might be because they're relying on those complaints that are in those civil lawsuits, as well as some other issues or things that determine probable cause. So the bottom line is that the U.S. Attorney's Office, especially in Los Angeles, is not going to charge somebody unless they feel confident that they have evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. So I think the bottom line here is the investigators want to gather everything. The prosecutors that are associated with this, they don't want to pull the trigger too soon because they want to make sure they get this right the first time, because you only get one chance. Right. Otherwise, if you go too quickly, they might have to dismiss counts or not arrest them at all.
Brian, want to turn this next question over to you. By the way, you can get your questions in on Facebook, YouTube, X, Twitter. Get them any which way you can. All right, so let's go to this question. This is from JT Baller 3 from YouTube. Do we get access to all the information presented in federal cases or not? I know there's no video. Interesting, because let's say an indictment were to come out today or tomorrow. What would be our level? What would our access be to those documents? What would we know?
Well, if the SDNY is running an investigation in coordination, the Southern District of New York is running an investigation in coordination with Miami as well as Los Angeles. Typically what they do when they do have an indictment, they post on their social media, specifically X, or their own website, and they'll put out a blurb of what the allegations are and what they're charging. This is me looking in it in the future if Sean Combs is indicted. So you might get that blurb and some information. We may also get an indictment. But if that information is not presented to the public, what I would tell most people is just come to Law&Crime. We're going to put in the request. We're going to get the information. I practice in the Southern District of New York. I'll use my Pacer account. We'll get the information to you one way or another. But it is redacted to some point because it is a federal investigation, and they like to play things close to the vest. So we might not get everything until trial starts.
Little self-promotion never hurt anybody. What can I say? Colin, this is a big question. I think you can guess it. If I gave you a multiple choice question about what you think this question is, I think you get it. This is from Kimberly Blankenship from YouTube. Isn't Diddy out of the country as we speak, or has he come back? And then also from the Danish girl from YouTube, did they locate him yet? And as far as I know, we don't have the answer. But having said that, based on the statement from his attorney, based on what we saw in the raid, what do you think you can tell us?
Well, I think it comes down to we don't know. We don't know. I did see the reporting that he was flying in a jet across the country, but then there was other reporting that wasn't his Gulfstream. And there's reporting that he flew out of the country, and then there's reporting that he's in Miami right now. So it's really at that early stage where everybody's making assumptions and kind of trying to fill in the blanks. This is going to shake out very, very quickly. And frankly, somebody of the stature of Mr. Combs, I mean, it would be tough for him to hide anywhere in the world if he indeed wants to hide.
Well, if he also goes to a country that doesn't have extradition, I'm sure that would obviously complicate situations. Although I want to now ask you, Colin, a follow-up question about the raid itself. Received a lot of controversy, I would say, obviously, from Diddy's legal team. They say that this was like a military effort. It was excessive. We have a question from Wheelie Pete from YouTube. Should his homes have been allowed to be raided, given that they were in his daughter's name and the name of the record company? Now, again, I can't confirm if that ownership is correct, but assuming it is, even so, you talk about the what was used there. We had armed personnel coming in. People were placed in handcuffs outside. Quite the presence. Walk us through if you think it was appropriate.
Well, just unpack that question a little bit. The first thing is using a SWAT team is what they use there. It might even been BORTEC, which is the Border Patrol, their tactical group, which is phenomenal group. The bottom line is they were going to go through probably a checklist of reasons why they would use a tactical response. And the number one reason they would is they may have gotten information that there's firearms in the house. And if that's the case, they want to certainly use whatever resources they have to make sure everybody is safe. Also, based upon the size of that estate,
Yep.
that by the time the officers got to the front door, everybody would have known what their purpose was. So using those tactical resources was absolutely, I think, appropriate, because they were concerned about not only their own safety, but the safety of the people there, and they wanted to do it in the safest manner. The second thing, as far as raiding a house that's in somebody else's name, it doesn't matter whose name it is. The warrant's going to say, or the affidavit's going to say that there's alleged or probable cause of criminal activity, or there's indicia of criminal activity is there, and that's what guides those warrants.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because, again, going back to those lawsuits, if you just read it there and you take everything as true, there are allegations of firearms possessions. There are at least 2 shootings that are mentioned in the Little Rod Jones lawsuit implicating Diddy. So, of course, we are going to be following that. All right, we have a question here, Brian. This is from K-Mam from YouTube. What legally needed to happen to allow this raid before an actual arrest? Do we know the probable cause? The civil suits?
So they're kind of answering the question there. It's probable cause. Do we know what the probable cause is? No. At best, I can tell you the level of information that law enforcement needs in order to kind of jump into someone's home and start searching it. So it's probable cause, which in layperson's term, I always describe it as the level of information that a reasonable officer would need to suggest that a crime did, is, or will occur. Now, you need some specificities as to that nature of the crime. You could probably look to the civil lawsuits for that, whether it be assault or sex trafficking, specifically probably the video evidence that Rodney Jones says he not only has, but says that Sean Combs also has, because he has cameras and recordings inside the home. And so if Rodney Jones is able to sit down and have a conversation from the time that he filed that lawsuit back in February of this year till now, he might be able to give law enforcement enough information to say, you know what, of all of Sean Combs' homes, we believe that Miami and LA have the information we're going to seek for. Let's go convince a judge of that. Let's get those warrants. Let's coordinate and let's move in.
I was speaking to former CIA and FBI agent Tracy Walder, who was of the opinion that this raid happened at that time to preserve evidence. There could have been an issue about whether evidence was going to be discarded in any way. We don't know. Having said that, Brian really hit it on the head, that if you read this lawsuit from a former producer of Sean Combs, it suggests that he had cameras in all of the homes in the different homes that he had, and it was video recording some of this illicit sexual acts, possibly as a form of blackmail. Could that be? That's something that they were looking at. Now, Colin, I go to you. This is a question from Gardens of the Gods from YouTube. Law and Crime Network, don't you think Diddy would have not had anything important on home computers? Would he have used unknown office somewhere with VPN and gadgets?
That's a speculation on how he's communicating. The most likely objective of this warrant was to get those tapes, alleged tapes that are there, as well as any other electronic devices that are there, any DVRs, any way of recording that digital evidence. I'm sure that they're going to grab everybody's phones, everybody that was in there, and just basically have a dragnet of evidence, grab everything they can. But the other thing is, if any of this is true, it appears that Mr. Combs or whomever was doing this got to a level of comfort. And so the fact that they were raiding these homes, it's because the law enforcement thinks that's where the evidence is going to be located.
Let me just follow up with you, Colin, because we have another question from Queen Chrissy from YouTube. Did Sean Combs know he would be raided the night before?
Unlikely. Yeah, I don't think so. I think he felt, he probably had a sense that he's in a lot of trouble based upon those civil lawsuits, because he's got the resources to hire very good attorneys who said the things that are in these lawsuits are very, very, very serious. But for him to know exactly when they were going to do this raid is highly unlikely.
All right, Brian, let me turn it over to you. This is a really, really good question. So as we said, these civil lawsuits happen. It was strange for me because I was actually reporting on this about 3-4 weeks ago before Diddy's name was in the news so much. And I was reading these lawsuits. I said, they're alleging criminal conduct. I wonder if criminal charges will happen. Now we see these raids. One of the things that was really interesting, one of the first lawsuits was Cassie Ventura. And she ended up alleging horrible things against Diddy and other individuals, rape, their gun possession. I mean, these illicit sexual acts that were very difficult to even describe. She settles with him the day after, and then we see multiple lawsuits that happen. The reason I ask you this is because Danny from YouTube says, was it a mistake for Diddy to settle the Cassie lawsuit? Good question, right?
Yeah, I mean, hindsight is 2020. I bet you that Sean Combs is probably somewhere pacing right now, thinking the same thing. There's a theory out there that you could suggest that settling one lawsuit invited others to have other lawsuits because they thought they could get their payday, so to speak. And it was the culmination of all these lawsuits that led to a criminal investigation. And under that theory, which is a very reasonable one, I can't tell you that it's true or not because I don't have the facts to support it. Yeah, I would say it's a bad idea. But on the flip side, if Sean Combs didn't settle that first case, the discovery process would have been horrendous. You have to sit for depositions. People get to question you. People get to question the other witnesses. Potential witnesses get to get called. You have attorneys like myself who have what's called subpoena power. So we get to call other people to come and testify. So damned if you do, damned if you don't. This might have been the smarter choice, but I think both were difficult choices to make.
And I know he made public comments afterwards. Well, I should say written comments afterwards, but basically said this is like a money grab. The floodgates are open, something to that effect. And clearly the statement released by his attorney yesterday is very consistent with this idea of this is a witch hunt, that this is, he's innocent of all the charges. He hasn't done anything wrong. Colin, go back to you. Got a question from, and hopefully I'm not butchering this, Stewie T from YouTube. It's Stewie, S-T-U-I-E. So interesting. Maybe Stewie. Stewie T from YouTube. Surely, if they raided his homes, he should be arrested and questioned.
Not necessarily. They're going to rely on the evidence, the facts of the crime, and they're going to follow their own process. So it's one of those things we're going to just have to see where this goes. And I've done warrants where I haven't arrested the target of the warrant for many months, even a year later, just based upon the fact that I was gathering evidence. Because people got to remember, a search warrant is an evidence gathering tool. It's not an arrest warrant. So this is part of the process, and it may take some time before they go to the next level, if indeed Mr. Combs is guilty of any of these things that people are accusing him of.
Let's talk about the next level. This is a really good question. We have great questions from our viewers. This is for Brian. This is Taylor from YouTube. Would they need to go to a grand jury for an indictment?
This would be feds. Yes, for an indictment, but you can also have a special indictment or like an information that's presented just to the judge. I would expect, though, in a case like this, yes. But of course, a grand jury is a secret process. We won't know what type of grand jury. There's special grand juries that collect information. There are grand juries that return indictments. We don't know if they're going to go through one or the other or both. But if you're looking for an indictment, yes, the most common form or process of doing that is through a grand jury.
So, Colin, this is another good question. This almost sets up what I would say, I don't know if it's a defense, but I think this question is wondering if it could be a defense. Shan Caesar from YouTube, is it trafficking, meaning is it sex trafficking, when the participants travel willingly?
As my understanding of the Mann Act, that it's very straightforward that if they are transferred for the purpose of sexual purpose, that it still meets the elements of the law. And because the theory behind the law is, are they able to give consent to travel in that circumstance, because of they may be under some sort of intimidation or maybe held against their will. We just don't know. But to say they consented to go across state lines for this purpose, you'd have to talk to the victims to figure out what the real story is.
Or if they're minors and they wouldn't be able to consent. Brian, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback off what Colin is saying as well. Think of it this way. It's less about the travel, more about the destination. And so if you consent to flying to LA, but you know that the destination you're going to have unconsensual sex, that would be a violation of the Mann Act or of human trafficking. It's not necessarily the reason for traveling, but the reason for the destination, I think, is the easiest way to say it. And I think Colin was saying that as well.
And talking about these, So the allegation that you have these people, Brian, that signed NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, right? This is Johnny Infidel from YouTube. Whether it was NDAs or they settled a lawsuit, do NDA victims may have signed with Diddy still hold? Or do NDAs go out the window once a criminal investigation has been started? In other words, can they cooperate?
Yeah, so yes, as the kind of the second part of your question. I'll put it easier this way. You can't NDA criminal acts. I can't walk up and punch Jesse Weber in the face and be like, sign this NDA and don't tell anyone I assaulted you. That's not necessarily the way that it works. Another component to that as well is if you look at the Rodney Jones lawsuit, part of his NDA is that he wasn't paid appropriately. So an NDA is a quid pro quo. I won't speak if you pay up properly. And so Rodney Jones would say, my NDA is not even legit. So
it's a contract. There has to be an agreement.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Colin, let me go to this. This is from Nikki Hayes from YouTube. Will all of the footage of the security cameras he has be taken as part of the raid? Interesting question, because we talked about earlier, one of the allegations put forward by Rodney Jones is that on that camera footage at Diddy's properties is evidence of illicit sexual activity or even just blackmail. Some videos that may tend to show some of these relationships that are being alleged by Jones. So again, the question is, will all the footage of the security cameras be taken?
Absolutely. And HSI most likely brought in experts in digital forensics that will know how to get to those videos that are stored on DVRs or computers or some sort of digital devices. And they are going to take everything digitally that they can get their hands on.
All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to take more of your questions. Again, submit them on Facebook, submit them on YouTube, submit them on X, Twitter. Still can't get used to it. Submit them any which way you can. We'll bring them up on the air. Again, any question you might have about this Sean Diddy Combs situation. I have a question. Somebody asked me a question. It's very nice. Always Overland from YouTube. Question for Jesse. Is the timing of this a distraction for something else that is happening? Why now? If I was a betting man, that sounds like a political question. I'm not going to say why you might be saying this. No, I don't believe that this is quite a distraction from something else. I think the timing of it is interesting in light of these different lawsuits that have come forward and different information that has been presented to law enforcement. And as we've talked about before, the timing of the raid suggests that perhaps they had feelings that some of this evidence needed to be preserved. Perhaps some of it was going to be lost. It's always strategic when these raids occur, but no, to say the least, I don't think that this is a distraction from something else that might be happening. All right, let's go to, this is a good question it's actually a good question for either of you, but I'll go to Brian. Derpy Cow from YouTube. How long does it normally take to issue an arrest warrant after a raid, assuming there is sufficient evidence?
Well, Derpy Cow, it depends on the sufficiency as well as the quality of the evidence and as well as the breadth of the investigation and the charges going against a person. It could be days, it could be months, it could be a year. I don't know what's on the electronics that were recovered. I don't know. I know there was some reporting that guns were found in both locations. I don't know if those guns are attached to other crimes or whether they were legally purchased and maintained. And so for that, I can't really gauge. What I would say is law enforcement moves quickly. They seem to have enough people that they could question, being the 5 people who had lawsuits. And if you want any gauge, I'll pull this out of thin air. Think about the last time you saw something like this with Keefe D. July of last year, I think it was July 20th, his place is raided. And then some 2 months later in September, he's arrested. And so that could be a metric you want to use. But again, it depends on the quantity and quality of evidence.
So, Brian, let me stick with you for a second, talking about the timing of when we could see a charge, because you and I were talking during the break about what might have been found at the residence. The reason I say this is because XX Toxic God XX from YouTube, Law&Crime Network, did they find anything in Diddy's homes? And if so, will it be used against him? Walk us through if they found anything where we might see charges sooner rather than later.
So at least from the reporting, I know they say they found electronics. Now the question is, what are on those electronics? Are we talking about Sean Combs and his family celebrating a birthday? Or are we talking about some of those Freaknik parties that Sean Combs have been famous for, those white parties where there are illicit and illegal conduct in them? Are you able to identify those individuals in them? Are you able to contact those alleged victims to see whether or not those actions were consensual. Because just because you see video recordings of people having sex, it doesn't mean, unless one of them is a minor, that that activity is illegal. You would have to find those people to see whether or not it was consensual. Are they going to testify? Are they going to speak with you? This is another reason why this case could be delayed. And so when you go through all those potential questions, the evidence may be very strong if you can corroborate with witnesses, or it could be absolutely nothing if no one else comes forward and you can't give full breadth to the evidence that you've collected.
These are great questions. I mean, honestly, fantastic questions. Keep them coming on YouTube, Facebook, X, Twitter. Keep them coming. We'll answer them right now. You got a retired FBI agent. You got a brilliant legal mind. Got the guy in the middle who was not dressed for the occasion. So, let's do it. I've got another question for you, Colin. This is another question from Shan Caesar. If excessive force was justified during the raid due to security reasons, why were civilians within proximity?
Well, it's kind of a loaded question to say excessive. I mean, I think based upon the fact that they found firearms there, I think the force was justified and not excessive. And then secondly, in terms of civilians walking by, we don't know the circumstances or when they came by. It looks like they had a perimeter and they were all kind of offset and they weren't in the middle of any of the law enforcement actions. So I don't think anybody was in any danger per se on the street. And using that level of force, I think they may have made it actually a safer situation for everybody involved.
Okay, this is interesting. We've talked so much about, well, they wouldn't do this unless they had something. They must have found something in the house. Charges are imminent. Brian, Chris from YouTube says, what if they find no further evidence as part of this raid, hypothetically speaking?
Yeah, it happens. I mean, I've had clients who have been targets of search warrants and they go in there and they don't find something. Their CI or confidential informant, snitch, whatever you want to call them, might give them bad information. A civil lawsuit may be just what Sean Combs is saying, a witch hunt, and there's nothing to corroborate it. And if nothing is found, then I would hope and I would expect the SDNY to come out and say, you know what? We have exhausted all options. We've spoken to whoever we can. We've done our search warrant. We maybe done subsequent search warrants, but we don't have anything, and therefore we will not be pursuing charges.
Do you think he could, if that was the case, obviously this is not good for his reputation. This has damaged him publicly for people who were not following the lawsuits like we were, who maybe were not following the in and out of Diddy's allegations over the years. Would he have Brian, would he have some sort of legal action against the government?
Not the government, because the government can only follow the allegations that an individual gives them. And so you don't want to get into a place where if I lie to the government and I say, I keep using you, Jesse, I'm going to pick on Colin now. Colin said that I assaulted him, right? I want my law enforcement to believe victims to an extent, to investigate and get that information to see whether or not it's corroborated. Now, if law enforcement does all of the steps they're supposed to do and they find out that Colin lied to them, then you know what? I don't have a beef with law enforcement. They did their job. I have a beef with Colin. And so I don't think the government will be on the hook, but it'll be the source of information who made that lie.
If they find out who the sources were or who the informants were. Okay.
Oh, Colin, I'm not coming for you. We're boys.
Colin's, I'm not gonna lie to you, Colin's a little scary. He's dressed in all black. I can't get any emotion from this guy. I'm freaked out, but I like him. Colin, let me go to you. Jamie Martinez from YouTube. Do you feel that celebrities that engaged in these activities will also be pursued, or do you think they will stop at Diddy?
Well, another loaded question. We don't know who engaged in what. We just have lots of allegations that haven't been thoroughly vetted or investigated. If there are celebrities per se that were involved in activities, especially with minors, there's a very high probability that the federal government is going to pursue them as well. However, it's from what the reporting is that a lot of this may have been an extortion issue. So there's going to be a lot of, if that is true, there's going to be a lot of embarrassing things out there. So the Southern District of New York is very, very careful about not embarrassing somebody if it's not going to move their case forward. And so that, to kind of echo on what's been said here, is we just have to wait till see all the chips fall.
But here's a kind of a related question to you, Brian. I mentioned it before. If these allegations are true and he is charged, that's the same conversation that we had with Jeffrey Epstein, with Harvey Weinstein. Was this just a known secret? The reason I ask that is because Tabitha Rose Freeman from YouTube asks, Are the people who worked for Diddy and were well aware of what was happening liable, even if they didn't participate? Again, assuming that there was some criminal activity happening.
Yeah, again, based on the assumption that there were criminal activity going on, I would say look no further than Rodney Jones's own lawsuit, who says that Sean Combs is, I think it's his manager or something of that effect, the person who kind of like runs his calendar, so to speak, that they analogize her to the Ghislaine Maxwell.
Yeah, so her name, Christina Coram, Combs' chief of staff, compared to the Ghislaine Maxwell, again, the former associate or madam of Epstein. One of the examples is, for instance, when Jones went to Coram to report Combs, she allegedly said, Sean will be Sean.
Yeah, and thank you for that. Christina Coram is one of the named defendants in both the original and the amended complaint for Rodney Jones. So to that point, yes. I mean, look what happened to the criminal case against Jeffrey Epstein before he ultimately lost his life, and then also Ghislaine Maxwell prosecuted afterwards. So you don't necessarily have to be the individual participating directly in the sexual assault, but if you are organizing the sexual assault and providing the resources to allow for it to happen, yeah, you can be found criminally liable.
Got another question for you, Colin. This is from Danny from YouTube. How long does it take for the feds to coordinate 2 raids like this? 2 separate jurisdictions, 2 different coasts?
Well, I can speak from the perspective of the FBI. They can move very quickly. They're already set up. They already have teams in place that are doing other things. And a case like this, it probably took maybe a couple of days based upon the sense of urgency. Phone calls were made, plans were put together, and HSI got it together and went out and took care of business. So to answer the question, it does not take very long to do something like this.
Brian, over to you. Really good question about this. Something that I mentioned before about the allegation put forward by Rodney Jones that Diddy has cameras in all of his properties, videotaping everything that's going on. The question from Ram from YouTube: what if certain celebrities being videotaped without their permission/consent? What could happen then?
I think it would depend from a state-by-state issue, because some states, like New York, you don't need to have consent to videotape another individual. I don't, and I'm sorry, I should have prepared for this. I don't have a list of all states where you need the permission to record someone else. But if it's in a state where you don't, then there shouldn't be an issue. If it is in a state where you need the consent of another individual to record them, that may be an issue insofar as them not doing criminal acts. I don't believe that privacy extends to illegal conduct. There might be a caveat to that. I don't think you could say, you know what, yeah, sure, I was having sex with this minor, but you shouldn't have been recording me during this. And even if that is true, that only deals with the video recording. It doesn't mean that the minor can't be found using that video and then testify against them. So it's one avenue locked down, but another one could possibly open for criminality.
I think we got this might be our first super chat of the day from Paulie7777. This one I'm going to go through. By the way, super chats are the best way to get your question up to the top so we can see it first, and we'll get to it before anything else. But Paulie7777 says, how difficult is it to get him back to the United States? Again, assuming he is not in the United States, assuming he is criminally charged, how tough is it to get him back here to be criminally prosecuted? Sure. Colin.
Oh, okay. So, well, it depends on where he's at. If he's in a place that there's no extradition, there was Roman Polanski, that case where I think he was in France for over 30 years and never came back to face justice. So, or if he's in an extraditable country, for example, the United Kingdom, it could happen fairly quickly based upon his notoriety and the resources that the Department of Justice would put towards this.
You know what? Let me stick with you, Colin, for a second. Assuming this is all true, Pepe from YouTube says, how did he get away with so many alleged assault charges in the last 2 decades? So in other words, if he was engaging in crimes for years, why was he not properly investigated or arrested beforehand? And obviously, we still don't have a lot of information. These are allegations in a civil lawsuit. We don't know what the context of this investigation is, but it is a fair question.
Well, speculating, there may have been a culture of intimidation to keep people quiet. He's a very powerful person in the entertainment industry. He's got a lot of powerful friends. If any of this is true, we don't know it's true. There may have been quite a bit of intimidation for people to stay quiet or to play ball, or they were involved in the acts as well. The same question could be posed to the Harvey Weinstein issue, because that went on for several decades as well.
Yeah, that's why I keep saying if he is charged, those questions are going to resurface about it. Was this just a known secret? And why did nothing happen sooner? We're not at that point yet. Again, he hasn't been criminally charged, and nobody in his camp has been criminally charged in connection with this sex trafficking, human trafficking investigation. Brian, go to you. We have a question from Eviscer8 from YouTube. If the individual flew someone from one jurisdiction where the person was not of age, and the suspect flew them to a jurisdiction where they would now be considered legal, would that be sex trafficking? Welcome to the bar exam. This is your first question.
This is definitely like a bar exam question. So I think you make the distinction between consent in one area and consent in another. First of all, consent and legal age are two different things. Some states have consent at a lower age than others. So I see what you're saying. But it would depend on when they landed, whether or not that sex was consensual based on, I guess, that age. But if you're doing it for the purpose of evading, I think that might be an issue in of itself. I don't think the federal government wants you to be like, you know what, I think the state next to me will allow me to have sex with this 16-year-old, so I'm just going to transport them over state lines. I think that still may run afoul with sex trafficking as well as the Mann Act, because the purpose in which you're traveling, you're basically trying to find a loophole in the law.
Right. This is a good question about privacy and sensitivity. I'm going to throw it to you, Colin, because if there is an indictment that comes down, I think it's going to be very interesting to know who was the victim, who was victimized here. Because Teresa Super from YouTube says, have those that have been trafficked been identified? Again, assuming that there really is a crime of trafficking. But have those that have been trafficked been identified? Are there any missing persons that will be reunited with family?
Well, once again, it's an investigation. There is a lot of moving parts here. There's a high probability that HSI already has some victims that they've interviewed, but the big purpose of that search warrant is to determine if there's more victims out there, or if there's any of these victims that are being held against their will in some other property. Because the number one purpose of these kind of activities or enforcement actions is to see if we can find victims and bring them to safety.
We got a question, super chat from Samantha NG. Thank you so much for putting the super chat in. Jesse, do you think Diddy fled? If so, where do you think he'd go? P.S. I love your hair and you're awesome. Well, thank you. It's glad I was able to submit that under my pseudonym. No, really, thank you so much, Samantha. So do I think Diddy fled? No, I don't think that he fled. There was something about the statement that was issued by his attorney that leads me to believe that he might still be in the country. I don't have any reason to believe that he escaped, or I even shouldn't say escaped, that he fled, that he's not here. Obviously, there was this video of him circulating in an airport, but I have no reason to believe that he's outside of the country. But I'll tell you this much, we just don't know. That's the bottom line. We do not know at this point. Thank you so much for the compliment. Very sweet. All right, let's keep going on. All right, I'm going to go back to you, Brian. It's a question that was asked earlier, but I think it's important to repeat. Johnny Infidel from YouTube asks, do NDA victims may have signed with Diddy still hold, or do NDAs go out the window once a criminal investigation has been started?
Yeah. For the record, that last question was real. I had to go to our Slack channel to be like, is this Jesse sending himself questions? No, that was a real question. Jesse's got fans. But we'll go back to that actual question you got from me, Jesse. And yes, they kind of go out the window. The easy answer is you can't NDA crimes. The other issue too is, was the NDA fully executed, in the sense of it's a contract. So there has to be something for something. You don't talk about this, and I give you that. I know in the Rodney Jones case, he's saying that he was a producer on Sean Combs' latest album, that he actually produced 9 of the songs on the Love album and never got paid the full amount. I think it was something about $30,000 wasn't paid, or something around that number. That's why he's asking for such a low number in the grand scheme of things in this lawsuit for payment not made. So if you don't fulfill your requirements of an NDA, it doesn't exist. And if you're NDAing criminal activity, law enforcement can still come and question you about it, and you maybe have to give that information up because you can't NDA crimes.
It's a great point. I think everybody should pay attention to that one because it does become a question in terms of what he might have allegedly tried to do to cover up any of these illicit activity. Again, he has not been criminally charged. He has not been officially indicted. He has not been indicted in any way, but some of these allegations are surfacing. Okay, so now let me go to another super chat. Colin, this one's for you. It's from Travelers of the Seas. Thank you so much for submitting a super chat. And what a perfect question to ask from Travelers of the Seas. Hello, young men. How come Diddy's yacht was not raided? Interesting question. Colin, I throw it to you.
We don't know that his yacht was not raided. It may have been. We haven't heard or seen the reporting. And then if it hasn't been raided, it's simply because they didn't have the probable cause to raid the yacht, because HSI has the resources to do as many raids as they need, that they think is appropriate and needed. So once again, there's a high probability that they did search that vessel. We just don't know about it.
Stick with you, Colin. PhotoGuard690 from YouTube. Was he on Jeffrey Epstein's island guest list or have a connection to it on a level that could be a common connection to the allegations brought against him?
I don't know the answer to that question, but we will probably get the answer to that question very quickly.
Brian, your tribe from YouTube. I'm kind of going quickly because we're actually running out of time. So your tribe from YouTube. Why do you think the FBI raided all of his homes and they're not even in his name and he left the country the same day? Assuming a lot there. Which
so assuming everything that you're saying is true, one, I don't think those are all of Sean Combs' homes. He has more than two. The only thing that I can really speculate to and make heads or tails of is in order to get a search warrant, you can't just say, I think Sean Combs has X. You have to say, I think Sean Combs has X, which would be evidence of a certain crime, and that would be found in these locations. There must have been some sort of CI or some sort of informant or some sort of witness to say that they had locked eyes on some form of evidence that exists within those homes. That's the only thing that makes sense to me.
I'm going to stick with you, Brian. Another question from Danny from YouTube. Question, Diddy's son, Justin Combs, was named in Rod Jones' lawsuit. What evidence would they need for a case against his son?
It would be the same thing against Sean Combs, whether he participated in the human trafficking, whether he participated in any sexual assaults, or whether he was part of an organization, as Rodney Jones seems to suggest, that created this enterprise under a RICO statute that funneled sex workers and trafficked individuals from one state to another, affecting interstate commerce, and that his son, Justin Dior Combs, participated in it.
And he's also in this lawsuit implicated in a shooting as well at a record studio, and also being present at a party where there were allegedly underage women. Okay, underage girls, I should say. Okay, so now, Colin, let me go to you. Always Overland on YouTube. Is Diddy's life at risk? Should he be protected if charged or called to testify?
That's speculation. I mean, he's got a lot of resources to pay for private security. So with that said, he's probably pretty safe with the people that are surrounding him, other than the fact that they may end up being witnesses to any of his past behavior.
Let me stick with you. We got 30 seconds. Queen Chrissy from YouTube. Colin, how long is the ETA on the review of evidence on Sean Combs and his electronic devices that were confiscated during the raid?
Depends on how much they took, and it could be months before they get through all that data.
Really fascinating stuff. Gentlemen, what a pleasure. Thank you so much for both coming on, breaking it down for us. Really interesting. I think it's fascinating to try to get a perspective on this when we don't know so much. If this advances, this goes to a place where he's ultimately charged, I imagine we are going to do another one of these. So Colin, keep your schedule open. Brian, keep your schedule open. Thank you both so much for coming on. Everybody, thank you so much for submitting your questions to us. We really appreciate it. We do it for you guys, and we love having this discussion, this back and forth with you, so really do appreciate it. Continue to follow us here at Law&Crime. We're always covering the big cases, and we will continue to follow the developments in the Diddy case. I'm Jesse Weber. See you next time, everybody.